Let's understand the conditional statements with the help of a few programs. So the first program, you see, the question has been given on your screen. So here we have been asked to accept the age of a user, and we have to report whether the user, whether the person whose age has been entered is eligible to vote or not. Now, the first assumption that we need to make is a minimum age of 18 is required for a person to be able to vote. Okay. Now, having said that, what we need to do is we need to implement this using Python statements. First thing that we need to do is we need to accept the age of the user. So how do we do that? We say we use the input function, and obviously we are going to prompt the user with a message saying that enter your age. Now on seeing this message, what will the user do? The user will enter a value which denotes his or her age. Now we know that the input function will always deal in strings. So it's our job to take the input and convert it into an integer, because we know that the age of a person will always be an integer. It cannot contain any fractions. So we'll convert this, we'll typecast it into an int. We have seen this in our earlier videos when we spoke about the input function, that we can accept the input from the user and then typecast it according to our requirements. Here we need numbers which are integers. That's why we have typecast it into an int. The next thing that we have to do is we have to check. See, here there is a question of checking, right? A person who is greater than or equal to the age of 18 is eligible to vote. So such checking conditions are ideal candidates to be used in if statements. So what is it? If you are more than 18 years of age, you're eligible to vote. So taking this statement, the statement that I just made, if you're eligible, if you are more than 18 years of age, you're eligible to vote. Taking this statement and transforming it into a Python statement is straightforward. We use the if keyword, and what do we check? We check whether the age is greater than or equal to 18 or not. And how do we represent this condition, greater than or equal to? We represent this using the greater than equal to relational operator. So we say if age greater than or equal to 18, then display that the person is eligible to vote. Now, how do we start a block? If you remember from the previous video, we start a block in Python by using the colon. So after writing the condition age greater than or equal to 18, we give the colon, we move to the next line, and we need to indent our block. Every block in Python is indented. And how is the indentation done? The indentation is done using 4 white spaces. So I'll press the space bar key on my keyboard 4 times. Once, twice, thrice, 4 times. And what do? I simply print. What do I print? Eligible to vote. That's it. Because that is what I've been asked to report, that we accept the age of the user and check whether the person is eligible to vote or not. So my job is done. The next thing that I have to do is I have to run this script, right? So let me open up my prompt, and now what I'll do is I will use the Python command. So I'll say Python space and I'll give the name of the file. If you observe carefully, the name of the file is vote.py. Okay, it's vote.py. So I'll say vote.py, and if I hit enter, okay, let me just expand this a bit. Yeah, so if I hit enter, I'm being asked to enter the age. So I'll say 28, and yes, the person with an age of 28 is indeed eligible to vote. Let's say if I enter a value which is less than 18, let's say I enter a value such as 16, I do not get any output. Why is this the case? Because once I enter a value of 16, see, this condition is being checked. Is this condition satisfied? Is 16 greater than 18? No. Is 16 equal to 18? No. So if the if the condition given in the if statement, the part that I've highlighted, if it is not satisfied, then the block of statements associated with the if, Here, how many statements are there in my block? In my if block, only one statement. This statement will not be executed. The condition has to be satisfied. When I entered 28, the condition was satisfied. As a result, the if block of statements got executed. Here, the block contains only one statement. Now, what is our job? Our job is to make this program even better. So if the person is not eligible to vote, we should be able to report that as well. So we should have an else part. So we should write else and give a colon and again press enter, start a block by indenting it using 4 white spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, and print, let's say, not eligible to vote. Not eligible to vote. There you have it. Now, if I run the code, if I run my program, let's say I entered the age as 16 like I did earlier, but I did not get any output this time. Yes, I get an appropriate message that not eligible to vote. Let's try another scenario. Let's say I enter a negative number. Let's say I enter something like minus 54. What am I getting? I'm getting not eligible to vote. But think about it. Can a person have an age which is negative? Obviously not. So there's no question of being eligible or ineligible to vote. A person can never have an age of negative value. As a result, it is our duty to report in such cases the message of invalid input because age can never be negative. So we should do another addition to our code. We should add another block. What we should do is we should have an elif block, right? Because now see, till this point we had two conditions. We had a condition where the age was greater than or equal to 18, denoted by the if condition, denoted by the if statement, and we had a second condition where the age was not greater than or equal to 18. So that was in the else part. Now what we'll do is we'll introduce a third condition. So whenever we have more than two conditions, we need to bring in an elif block, right? Remember from the previous video, whenever we have more than two conditions and the conditions are mutually exclusive. Think about it. A person cannot be more than 18 years of age as well as less than 18 years of age at the same time. So age is a mutually exclusive attribute. As a result, we should introduce the elif statement. So elif will take care of the third condition, which we are trying to incorporate, the condition of invalid input. So we'll say if age is less than 18, what we'll do is we'll start a block 1, 2, 3, 4, indent it, and print out a statement such as invalid input. Now, if we save this and if we run our code, let's say I enter minus 54 again, now you see that the program is complete. I get invalid input. So all possible scenarios have been taken care of. So this program or this question was a very good example where we started off with only the if block, right? Then we incorporated the else part into it. So it became the if else block. And lastly, for error checking, we incorporated the elif block, making it an if elif else block. So we have seen all three conditional block of statements through this program. A wonderful program indeed to illustrate conditional statements to beginners. Let's move on to the next one. Now, in the next question, we have been asked to accept a positive integer. Now, since it has already been told that we have to accept a positive integer, we can rest assured that whatever value is entered by the user, it will always be positive. And we'll have to print whether the number is odd or even. Now, what is the logic? Try to understand one thing. Whenever you divide, whenever, okay, sorry about that. Whenever we divide a number by 2, we get either 0 or 1 as remainder. And for the uninitiated, the hash symbol that you see at the beginning denotes a comment, a single line comment in Python. So I am writing these markdown statements as comments in order to enhance readability of my code. Coming back to the point that I was making, whenever we divide a number by 2, we either get 0 or 1 as remainder. Now, an interesting thing is, if the remainder, if the remainder happens, I'm making a lot of typos today. If the remainder happens to be 0, the integer, or let's say the positive integer, let's be absolutely clear about what we are talking about. Okay, another spelling mistake. Sorry about that. So the positive integer, if the remainder happens to be 0, on dividing by 2, if the remainder happens to be 0, the positive integer is set to be even, right? And you have guessed it. What is the other possibility? When you divide by 2, you get the remainder as either 0 or 1, right? So if you get the remainder as 0, the integer is set to be even. What is the other possibility? You get the remainder as 1. If the remainder happens to be 1, the positive integer is set to be odd. So which was the operator using which we can find the remainder? If you remember, the modulus operator, which in Python is denoted by %, is used to find the remainder. So we can make good use of the modulus operator to solve this question. And of course, it is a condition involved, right? There are two conditions involved. That means if I enter a number, it can be either this or that. It can be either odd or even. So whenever you have this either or scenario, you have to go for an if else. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to input the number from the user. So you prompt the user to enter a positive integer. Okay. I'm not carrying out any advanced form of error checking because this is more of a preliminary video. In the later part of this series of Python videos, I'll take up exception handling where we can come up with advanced forms of error checking. Okay, here we are only relying on the sanity of the user and the question that has been given to us. Since it has been given that we have to accept a positive integer, it's a safe assumption that the user will always enter a positive integer. Now what we do is we accept it, let's say in a variable called IP denoting input. Now our job is to check. What do we have to check? If the input on dividing by 2 gives us a remainder of 0, then we will print, see, I'm starting a block. So I'll do 1, 2, 3, 4. So if the remainder happens to be 0, we'll say input, give a comma, is even. So the value of input will be substituted here. Whatever value is entered will be substituted in place of the variable name. And then this statement is even will be printed. That enhances the readability. Else, what do? We again give a colon. We hit the enter and we make an indentation of 4 white spaces. And then we print, sorry about that, we print IP. That means my input is odd. Okay, so that brings an end to the code, right? Okay, one thing you must have noticed in the previous code as well, that is we do not require parentheses, right? You write your if keyword and you simply write the condition after it. The same thing we've seen over here, right? You simply write the condition. Okay, now let's save this and let's try to run it. Okay, let me clear the screen for you. And let's try to execute this. The file is called, as you can see, odd underscore even.py. If we execute this, the user is asking for a positive integer. Let's say I enter 23, and 23 is odd. Indeed it is. Let's try another input. Let's say I enter 32. 32 is even. Again, we get the correct result. So this is how we go about solving such a question. We again make use of the if-else block. Moving on to the third question. In the third question, we have been asked to accept a positive integer and check if it is divisible by 3 or 7. When would we say that a number is divisible by another number? When would we say that a number, let's say m, is divisible by another number n? We would say that a number m is divisible by n when we divide m by n and get a remainder of 0. So that same logic will be applied here. Again, first things first, we'll have to accept a positive integer from the user. Let's call our variable IP, short for input, and let's prompt the user for a positive integer. So let's say enter a positive integer. Now on seeing this statement, the user will enter an appropriate value, and now it's our job to check whether it is divisible by 3 or 7. So how do we do that? Now see, there are two conditions involved. See, in the previous two questions, you had only one condition, right? This was the sole condition that was involved, a mod 2 checking. Even in the voting case, we had one condition at a time. So in the if statement, you had one condition. In the elif statement, you had one condition. But if you look at this question that we are currently solving, we have to take into consideration two conditions. What are the two conditions? It is either divisible by 3 or it is either divisible by 7. So there are two conditions involved. Whenever we have to join multiple conditions, see, conditions have been written with the help of relational operators, as well as sometimes arithmetic operators come into the picture as well, like mod has helped us in this case, which is an arithmetic operator. Mod is an arithmetic operator, but in most cases we'll be using relational operators, like equal to has been used in this example. In the vote example, we use the greater than or equal to. We use the lesser than. So mostly while writing if statements, elif statements, we will be having relational operators. Now, when you have multiple conditions to be expressed, you will combine your relational operators using logical operators. Okay, you will combine your relational operators using logical operators. Now, another thing that I must point out is you have seen that we must have a condition attached with the if statement. We must have a condition attached with the elif statement as well. But in all cases, remember, the else part will never have a condition attached to it. So the else would only involve, the else part would only involve the else keyword followed by the colon and then the block of statements associated with the else block. There will not be any condition like we see in elif or in if for an else, because the else part denotes that all conditions present above it, like in this example that you see on your screen, the else part, above the else part, you have an if part and an elif part. The else part denotes that the two conditions above it, denoted by the if part and the elif part respectively, have not been satisfied. Therefore, let's execute the else part. The same thing was for the odd even example, that okay, the if statement that is present above the else, the if statement, the if block that is present above the else was not executed. So all right, let's execute the else part. So this is another thing that I wanted to point out. And now, after we have the integer with us, we'll have to incorporate the two conditions. So what is the first condition? If my input, when divided by 3, gives a remainder of 0, this can be one condition. Or when my input is divided by 7, it gives a remainder of 0. Right? Here we are using the logical OR operator. So how is the logical OR denoted? The logical OR is denoted using OR, right? Using OR, the two letters OR for OR make up the logical OR operator. So first we check whether the input is divisible by 3 or not. How do we do that? Using the mod operator. So on dividing input by 3, if we get a remainder of 0, that means it is divisible by 3. And the next condition is if we divide the input by 7, we check whether the remainder is 0 or not. If the remainder happens to be 0, we say that the number is divisible by 7. Now, if either of these two conditions is satisfied, then we should print an appropriate message saying that the number, let's say we just print the message divisible by 3 or 7. Otherwise, what we can do is we can have an else part where we say 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I think I made an extra state. Just give me a moment. Let me just verify. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And here I should have 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's better. So if it's not divisible by 3 or 7, we should print a statement appropriately saying that it is not divisible by 3 or 7. Okay. Now see, how does this work? How does OR work? If you remember from our video on logical operators, you would recollect that if the first condition is satisfied, this is how logical OR works. If the first condition of the logical OR, so which is the first condition of logical OR here, IP mod 3 equal to 0. If this condition is satisfied, then the second condition will not be checked. Okay. If the first condition of the logical OR is not satisfied, then it moves on to check the second condition. If the second condition is satisfied, fair enough, the if is satisfied, you execute the statements in the if block. Now, if the first condition of the logical OR is not satisfied, if the second condition of the logical OR is not satisfied, that means if all conditions joining, or if all conditions pertaining to the logical OR are not satisfied, if none of the conditions pertaining to the logical OR is satisfied, then the entire if statement, the entire if condition is deemed to be not satisfied. So the entire condition will not be satisfied and the if block will not be executed. So we'll come to the else part and execute the statements in the else block. So that is how the logical OR works. So that was a quick recap for you. Now let's try to execute this. So what we'll do is we'll run this. We'll say Python divisibility dot py, and now they're asking for a positive integer. Let's enter a number which is divisible by 3. Let's say 30. And yes, it is divisible by 3 or 7. Absolutely. Let's try another number. Let's try something like 14, which is divisible by 7 but not by 3. Yes, it is divisible by 3 or 7. Let's try a number which is neither divisible by 3 nor divisible by 7. Something like 100. Absolutely, it is not divisible by 3 or 7. So the program seems to handle all the cases successfully. Okay, now let's move on to the next question. Here we have been asked to accept an integer from the user and check if it is positive, negative, or 0. Again, branching is involved. A number cannot be positive, negative, and 0 at the same time. A number cannot be positive and negative at the same time. A number cannot be negative or 0, negative and 0 at the same time. So these are mutually exclusive conditions. Again, we have to bring in our conditional blocks into the picture. And here we have to check for 3 conditions. We have to check for positive, negative, as well as 0. That means we'll have to use the if, elif, else block. First things first, we'll have to accept the integer from the user. So how do we do that? Again, IP, short for input. So we have the input function with us and we prompt the user with a message. Something like enter an integer. On seeing this message, the user will enter an integer, and of course, we'll have to typecast it to an int so that the string representation can be appropriately dealt with in integer form. Now what we have to do is we'll have to check. What is the first checking that we want? The first checking that we want is whether it is greater than 0 or not. If it is greater than 0, then 1, 2, 3, 4, we print an appropriate statement saying that the number is positive, right? Now, the next condition that I want to take care of is for negative numbers. So if IP happens to be less than 0, then we start a block. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and we print an appropriate statement saying that we know that numbers which are less than 0 are negative numbers, so we report a statement accordingly saying that the number is negative. Now, think about it. If a number is not positive, if a number is not negative, then the only option that you have left is that the number is 0. So we can incorporate this 0 part with the help of the else part, or with the help of the else block. So we can say that the number is 0, right? Now, this else part, this could have been done in a different way as well. I'll show you. Let me just run the program in the way that I have done it so far. So let me try to execute this. Let's say Python space positive, negative, and 0 dot py, and if I enter an integer, let's say 45, I get the correct output that the number is positive. Now let's say I enter an integer which is minus 45. The number is negative. Let's say I enter 0. The number is 0. So it works fine, right? Now this else part, remember I had mentioned that in the if else block, the else part is optional. So if you want, you can do away with the else part, and in place of it you can include the elif part. So you can say elif ip equal to 0, then the number is 0. Although this is a bit less efficient, we should, I think it's always better to have an else part instead of having another elif, because we are sure that if the above two conditions are not satisfied, the third part will come into the picture. So in that case, you would always go for an else. Anyway, this is just an alternative way of implementing it. So let's see. So if I enter an integer again, let's take the same inputs. 45, number is positive, it works fine. What about minus 45? Yes, it's negative and it works fine. And what if we enter 0? Yes, it still works fine. So this is another way of going about doing things. So that was another program which dealt with positive, negative, and zeros, right? Now, this fifth program, this will be the topic of discussion in our next video. I hope you found this video useful. Stay tuned for more. And if you like this video, do subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for more updates. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.